Hi everyone. So I wanted to create this video today to talk about a topic that's come up recently in direct communications and on the various discussion groups, which is the presence of multiple papers or attributions on the same sword. And it's not that uncommon of a situation to see an unsigned sword that has different attributions from the same group over different time periods or from different groups. Ultimately, if a sword is unsigned, it is an opinion of who they think made the sword. Now, this is an opinion that's leveraging years and oftentimes decades of experience, but opinions can vary. The swords that the individuals in the Shinza team have seen in the past, they have different experiences and they may remember a certain characteristic that they've seen years ago. So it's not an uncommon situation, it does happen. So I wanted to show this example of a sword from my collection I purchased in 2017 that has 3 different attributions attached to it. And when I saw the sword for the first time, I knew that it was a very fine tachi, at least Kamakura period. It had one set of papers at the time, and that was from the NTHK, the Nihon Token Hozonkai, back when Kentaro Yoshikawa was running the organization. And it attributed the sword to Enju Kunitogi. And this is an individual that worked in the late Kamakura period, so this is the early 1300s up to 1333, and the school was the Enju school. They worked in Higo within Kyushu, and they followed the Yamashiro-den, so followed the work style of swords that were being made in Kyoto. So the Enju school was very similar, very, very close to Yamashiro-den swords from the Rai school, like Rai Kunitoshi and Enju Kunimura show a lot of common characteristics. So with an Enju work, you typically see very fine koi tamehara, you see suguha, niedeki hamon, and oftentimes it's a difference in the boshi, or the way that the yakiba ends within the kasaki of the sword, that can be the determining factor of whether a sword is a Rai school example or a Yamashiro-den example, or an Enju example. So when I purchased the sword, it had papers to Kunitoki, and I felt that while it was a very fine blade of at least the Kamakura period, the attribution didn't seem spot on in my opinion. I was not second-guessing the Shinza team, but I thought that it was something that was worth further study. So I purchased the sword. I'm going to go ahead and pull the blade out right now. It's a very long tachi measuring 2 shaku, 6 sun, 2 bu in length. And it has that classical shape, or sugata, that we associate with Kamakura blades. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the nakago, or tang of the sword. This is a blade that is ubu, so it has its entire original length. It has not been shortened. And I think that from the shape you can see why I was thinking that it was at least at the time period, if not older. So looking at the blade, it had characteristics that for me felt more Yamato. So quite a bit of masame, or straight grain, compared with the ko-itame, or that really tight, compacted wood grain that you'll see in the forging of the sword. Hamon, rather than being sugaha, has quite a bit of variation. So in areas it's no tare, in other areas it's a midare, so it varies up and down, and a lot of activity throughout the blade. The kasaki of the blade is very small, and my feeling looking at it is it seemed to be more similar to Yamato-den work. Yamato-den is a school that worked in the area around Nara. So Nara schoolworks are associated with temples. There are 5 main groups of Yamato. You had Senjuin, Shizu, Taima, Hosho, and Tegai. So that was really the starting point for my study, is there enough in the sword that would make sense for it being Yamato rather than Yamashiro, just to extend my study further. So I did spend quite a bit of time studying it, looking at oshigata, which are hand-drawn sketches of various blades, comparing them closely with my sword. Now, I don't want to say that I'm second guessing a Shinza team, but a Shinza team may only see a sword for a very limited length of time, and they make a judgment based on their experience. There is a benefit of having a sword in front of you and looking at reference books and oshigatas over and over for, in this case, about a year and a half that I had before I decided to send the sword back out again for another judgment. And my feeling was, I thought it was something related to Yamato. I was leaning towards Senjuin as a school, so I think that Senjuin is one of the best of the schools or branches of the Yamato Den. And that's as far as I could personally take it, as far as making a judgment or extending my opinion. So at that point, I decided it was best to send the sword back to Japan. And I did that in the very beginning of 2020. So at that time, it was just before the pandemic, I was only able to get it as far as initially having the sword viewed by Tanabe-sensei. Tanabe's opinion at the time was along the same as my judgment as well. He thought it was Senjuin, but specifically he felt that the blade was Ko-Senjuin. So that's the Senjuin school, but from the very earliest part of the school. So we're talking about Heian period, so up to 1185, or the very early part of the Kamakura period as well. So that, in his opinion, gives a judgment of when the sword was made and reinforces what I was thinking earlier, which is that it more closely aligns with Yamato rather than Yamashiro Den. So at that point, the sword went to the MBTHK for judgment for Shinza and papers. I was not planning on sending it back to Tanabe until after the papers were issued, and then the pandemic hit. So what ultimately happened is the blade was viewed by the NBTHK. They issued Tokubetsu Hoson papers to, it was very surprising to me, to Ko-Uda Kunifusa. Ko-Uda Kunifusa is a smith of the Uda school, which is, you could say it's a mixture of Yamato and Soshu work. So Kunifusa was a smith that studied with Norishige, which is one of the greatest of the Soshu smiths of all time, potentially one of the greatest smiths of all time. And he moved to Etchu, and he brought with him the Soshu tradition, so very vibrant, active Hamon blades that are full of martensite, full of activity, Nie-based activity. But then the work of his students can show a bit more Yamato influence as well. So in terms of the blade leaning more towards Yamato, the MBTHK's judgment of Ko-Uda Kunifusa agreed and moved in that same direction. That smith, Ko-Uda Kunifusa, studied under Norishige, but he also was the son of Konyudo Kunimitsu, who was a swordsmith that also produced work that had a very strong Yamato feeling to it. So it was very interesting. I view every time you get a Shinta result, it's a learning experience. You may or may not agree, but it's educational, it's instructive to think about why it is that they came to that decision, and again, start looking at Oshigata, studying, and trying to understand the mind of the Shinza team. So that's really as far as I got it, as far as the Shinza submission. My intention had been to have the sword polished and then send it back over to Tanabe for Saigaki. In this case, I have a different judgment from the MBTHK than from Tanabe's judgment, but the pandemic hit. Everything that I had in Japan at the time, I withdrew and I brought home. So this is going to be a project for the future. The sword may return to Japan, go through the process of polish. Potentially, I may submit again to the MBTHK to see if in a new polish their judgment alters at all, which also does happen. But it's just been a really great educational experience, and I just kind of want to loop back to the original question, which is that yes, you can see very dramatically different attributions from different groups, and the best thing to do, I think, is to look at all the papers and study, and then really try to understand what characteristics led the team to go into different directions with their attribution. So that's it. I'll follow up with more information on the blade and with additional videos in the future. All right, thank you.